Hello everyone and welcome back to another Granblue Fantasy Relink video. Update 1.3 saw the addition of a ton of content in the form of new quests, including of course the most painful torture device ever created, the Zero mission, and on top of that we saw the addition of Best Girl Sandalphon. However, that is not all, as we also saw the addition of a couple of cool features, such as photo mode and a map overlay, as well as the ability to fuse together different sigils to obtain a result that you want, and among all of this, a lot of players may actually have missed that Update 1.3 did add a balance patch on top of this. So we actually saw some characters being buffed and some others being nerfed, and there was also a lot of bug fixing to be done, so let's go over all of that, and at the end I will talk about the overall current balance of the game and what we can expect to see from the future of Granblue Fantasy Relink. With that being said, hello everyone, my name is Dark Hero and let's get started. So we are starting off with the captain. Now, given that in the previous update, the captain along with 3 other characters had a bug that allowed them to remove the damage cap of certain ranged skills, which of course led to them dealing a crazy amount of damage. That has now been fixed in update 1.3, and on top of that, the damage cap for Regin Leaf has also been increased. As for Charlotte, who is still one of the very best characters in the game, she has received a buff in the form of a quality of life update, wherein some of her combo skip effects that are gained after link attacks and damage skills should be retained even after you dodge. I do believe that this was supposed to be the case from the beginning, but it was just not properly implemented up to this point. Next up we have Narmaya that got a very nice quality of life change that I was asking for since the release of the game. Basically you now get a new UI element that is going to display the current amount of butterflies that Narmaya has at any moment. So you will be able to better keep track of that amount, which is of course extremely important for Narmaya's damage output. Additionally, much like with Charlotte, some of her combo skip effects that were gained after link attacks and damage skills should now be retained after dodging, which should have been the case from the beginning. Next up we have Lancelot, and a pretty funny change is that they have changed the playback conditions for some of Lancelot's voice lines, which I assume comes as a result from a lot of players using Lancelot to clear some of the hardest content in the game, and because everyone is spamming the dash attack, I guess the developers decided to tone down the voice lines. They have fixed the bug that allowed Lancelot to remove the damage cap from his ranged projectile, which again is the same thing with the captain, which is something that we were all expecting to see. But on the other hand, they ended up increasing the damage cap of that very same skill. After that we have Vayne. They have fixed the bug that caused energy destruction damage cap to not work properly, and at the same time have increased the damage cap of energy destruction. I believe that the skill was simply not taking into account your SPA gauge to deal more damage, however this time around it should actually do it. Next up we have Percival, and they have fixed the bug that is actually very curious, where the game would unintentionally grant you the effect of the Lord's Warpath sigil by triggering the conditions for a different sigil, which just sounds like some weird coding on the game's end. After that we have Siegfried. They have implemented measures to mitigate Siegfried's Skybound arts from missing due to certain conditions. I do believe that this has actually affected me in the past, as I was pretty sure that I have landed my Skybound arts a bunch of times, but the game actually didn't take that into account, so I'm guessing that is what this is about. After that we have Cagliostro, and there have been a bunch of bug fixes as well. Again, Cagliostro was one of those characters that could deal an insane amount of damage by removing the damage cap, but that has now been fixed, and we even get some extra buffs by raising the damage cap of the skills Alexandria and Pain Train. And lastly, they have fixed the bug that caused Disruption to not remove a buff from the enemies as the skill was not working properly. After that we have Yodarha that again now properly retains the combo skip effects after link attacks and damage skills even after you dodge. And much like with Percival, they have also fixed a bug that was causing the Swordmaster's Warpath sigil to trigger based on the conditions of a different sigil. Man, this game's coding has some serious issues. After that we have Zeta that I believe is the final character that had the uncapped damage skill bug, so that has now been fixed. And like all the other characters, that same skill, which in this case is Infinite Wonders, has seen the damage cap increased. They've also fixed the bug that would occasionally cause Zeta to have a reduced number of dodges whenever she performed a dodge after a high jump, and they have fixed the bug that caused the Thousand Flames to not remove a buff from the enemy when that should have been the case. Up next we have my boy Vazaraga with a single line in the entire patch notes, and it states that they have fixed the bug that under certain conditions caused link attacks to fill up his gauge more than intended. I personally was not aware of this, but let's be real, it's not like Vazaraga needs any buffs, he is already a very powerful character. After that we have Sophon. Funny enough, both Sofon and Toyen have seen a bug fix that caused them to collide into certain objects while on some of the Sand Dunes map, though I am curious as to how many players did actually spot that. And for Sofon specifically, they have fixed an intermittent bug that caused the Spirit Edge's Warpath sigil to not apply correctly to a portion of Sofon's attacks. Now I am wondering if this is going to make the Warpath sigil even more worth it for Sofon, because I was talking to some players and they actually seem to not like to use this one as much, so maybe this change can make it more universally viable. After that we have Toyen, which again I talked about the collision bug, and they've also fixed a rare bug where under certain conditions, power finishers would not be able to be performed and the ultraside level would not increase, both of which would be very detrimental to Toyen's damage output. Now a funny thing that happened actually is I was playing with some friends a couple of days ago, and one of them that a lot of you may already know of, Braxophone, that also has the channel Brax Alter where he covers Relink as well, he was using Toyen and he was not able to use the guaranteed paralysis that you get after you use your SBA, and that happened like 3 times in a row. I'm not sure if that is a bug, but if that has happened to you, let me know how you experienced that in the comment section. And the final character in the patch notes is of course the edgy boy Id. They have made it so that the combo skip effects are now going to be retained even after you dodge after performing a link attack, so that is a nice quality of life change, and they have fixed the bug where, under certain conditions, your combo finishers in dragon form would fill up the Versailles gauge more than intended. I personally don't believe I ever ran into that bug, but that is pretty much it for the bulk of the character balancing patch notes. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, I do want to talk about the overall balance of the game. Of course, there are some characters that are going to be performing better compared to some others, with of course the example that I always bring up being Charlotta. That being said, I do believe that we have reached a very balanced and healthy state of the game, where you can have fun and pretty much every single character is going to be viable, and you're going to be able to do more than well with all of them. Some characters are going to struggle more than others with different types of combat, but given how much we are able to customize our characters' builds and how much power and utility we are able to give them, I really do believe that with enough practice, you are able to clear all the content in the game with any character, even including the new Zero quest where you fight off against the empowered Lucilius. That being said, on one hand, I do believe that it is very cool to see that the developers have made such a difficult fight that kind of feels like on the same level as a Savage Raid from Final Fantasy XIV, where the developers really paid attention to the damage that our characters can deal, the type of builds and sigils that we are able to add, and have taken all of that into account. But at the same time, it kind of feels like you're being pushed into using the same sigils for the hardest content in the game, where it is essentially pretty much mandatory to always go in Nimble Onslaught, and in some cases Flight over Fight as well. And then of course, if you go into some of these harder quests online, for the most part the character that you're going to find the most is going to be Lancelot because of that permanent dodge build. I personally don't love this build, and the fact that it exists, it really feels like you are essentially just cheesing the game, though to be honest I am partially to blame for this being so popular because after all I have made a video where I talked about this build exclusively. Of course I am by no means the creator of this build, nor would I ever take credit for such a thing. This was actually something that my viewers recommended me to try before Lucilius released, and so I followed that recommendation, and because I had some fun with it I ended up making a video on it. I was kind of expecting the developers somewhere along the path of these updates to eventually just make it so that this build really doesn't function the way that it does. Ultimately, it seems like it's a playstyle that the developers are okay with being in the game, as they have nerfed a ton of things across the game, but that remains untouched. I also find it kind of funny that the optimal way to play the new character Sandalphon is to just spam the light step and keep on mashing the triangle button. And I think that very much encapsulates how the developers have been balancing the game, where sometimes it feels like they don't pay too much attention to how they balance the characters. And I've also been very vocal about this, but I generally just don't like the damage cap system. I feel like it ends up limiting our builds, though to be fair at this point in the game, and now that we have access to the sigil fusing, it doesn't feel as limiting as it was before, but still it's not a system that I entirely like. And given that 1.3 is more likely than not going to be the final update of Granblue Fantasy Relink, I'm also a bit sad that we didn't see the introduction of those lengthy story quests where you explore the map, have to do some side objective and have to find some hidden chests, I found that early portion of the game that you play throughout the story was actually fun, and it was a bit disappointing to not see that type of quest being added to the game as part of any update. Ultimately, I think we all know the reason as to why that was not the case, and it's the same reason why we are likely not getting more updates and more characters, and it all comes down to money. This is not a live service game, and as such there's not a recurring source of income, and so there is no incentive for the developers to keep on adding content to the game, so it is perfectly understandable as to why the developers may stop developing this game. There has been no concrete proof or evidence that this is going to be the final update, nothing has been confirmed as of yet, so if we do end up getting anything else in the future, it's just because the developers and the community all love this game very much. And just in case anyone is wondering, I am a huge fan of this game. I have been anticipating it since 2018, and this game is the reason why I got into the Granblue franchise as a whole. I played the mobile game, I played the fighting game, and I think that was the intention with this game, to bring a new audience into the Granblue franchise, and hey, that has personally worked for me. Of course, it would be ideal if the developers would keep on adding content to the game, much like we saw Capcom adding new updates to Monster Hunter World and Rise, for example, but again, it all comes down to the scale and the funding that is available, and maybe Cygames just doesn't see it as a benefit. I will keep on singing the praises for Granblue Fantasy Relink, because despite the game's many flaws, it still remains one of my favorite games that has released in the past few years, and so for as long as possible I will try to act out as a Granblue Fantasy Relink salesman. But with that being said, let me know how you guys feel about update 1.3 and the entire state of the game. Do you expect to see any more new updates coming into the game? And if so, what would you like to see? Me personally, all that I could hope for is new characters, and from the fighting game my personal favorites are Vera, Lucilius and Zoe. With all of that being said, thank you all so much for watching, my name is Dark Hero, and as always, happy hunting!